Hello, my name is Evan Chester, and welcome to my guide to the earliest animated films, covering the years 1900 to 1915. The field of animation has, in my opinion, been one of the most interesting forms of film and one of the most expressive. And its history actually goes almost all the way back to the beginning of movies. The first movie was in 1888, and the first example of an animated work that we know of is from 1900. Now, that first example is a short 2-minute film called The Enchanted Drawing. Like I said, it's from 1900. It was not entirely animated, as it included some live action footage, but it was the first movie with animated sequences as far as I'm aware. Obviously, there could have been something earlier that was lost to history, but as of now, this is the earliest that we know of. It consists of a live-action man drawing a picture of a male face on an easel, as well as some other objects like a cigar and a glass of wine. He takes the drawings off the paper and they turn into real items. Also, the man in the drawing magically changes his facial expressions, and this is where the stop-motion animation part comes in. So it isn't really an animated film in the traditional sense, but it qualifies enough to be included here. Now, the Enchanted Drawing, it's kind of gimmicky, but it's cute, and it's definitely worth checking out to see the roots of animation. It was directed by a man named J. Stuart Blackton, who also starred in the film. He was born in the UK, but he came to the US at age 10, and he's often referred to as the father of American animation. Blackton also ended up making the first entirely animated work, and that was a 3-minute short film from 6 years after that, in 1906. And it was called The Humorous Phases of Funny Faces. It used stop motion and cutout animation, and it depicts hand drawing images on a blackboard that end up coming to life. Like The Enchanted Drawing, it's just a fun little diversion that isn't meant to be taken too seriously. As you can tell, it's a bit crude by today's standards, but it's definitely entertaining. Moving forward a couple years to 1908, we see the first film using quote-unquote traditional animation methods, a French film called Phantasmagorie. The less than 2-minute short showed a stick figure and several objects that transform into other objects. It does have a live action hand drawing the images in the beginning, but the rest is completely animated. It was made by drawing each frame on a piece of paper. There were actually over 700 drawings, and then shooting it with film. The lines were originally black, but the film was then printed in negative. Phantasmagorie survives and is currently on YouTube, but the footage hasn't been preserved that well, unfortunately. Then in 1908, there was another work by J. Stuart Blackton that was a stop-motion short called The Humpty Dumpty Circus. Albert E. Smith, who founded Vitagraph Studios with Blackton, was also a producer. As the title suggests, it portrayed a circus with various animals and performers. The film has some historical significance, as it's the first American work to use stop-motion animation, according to Wikipedia. Kind of confusing, because some places have this listed as a 1898 work, but IMDb has it as 1908, so I assume that's more accurate. Also, sadly, I did not find this uploaded online anywhere. 3 years later, in 1911, we see the first film work by a pretty influential American cartoonist named Winsor McCay. And this film work was called Little Nemo, also titled, this is a mouthful of a title, Winsor McCay, the famous cartoonist of the New York Herald and his moving comics. The animated short was based on McCay's newspaper comic Little Nemo, which ran from 1905 to 1914. Little Nemo, along with his other strip Dream of a Rarebit Fiend, brought McCay success and fame. Supposedly he was then inspired to make cartoons by seeing flip books. He also apparently thought of himself as the first to make any sort of animation. The credits even state this in the film, but we obviously now know that wasn't the case. Having said that, he was definitely a very influential figure in the field of animation. The film consisted of 4,000 frames that were drawn by hand on rice paper and then photographed. There were also extensive live-action sequences, and it was probably the most sophisticated animated movie to this point, and in my opinion, it's pretty visually impressive. Also released that same year in 1911 was an early work by Russian stop-motion animator Vladislav Starowich, and it was called The Grasshopper and the Ant. He was born in Moscow in 1888. He was very interested in insects, and he actually used dead insects as actors, if you want to call them that, in his films, which to me ended up looking a bit creepy. There are kind of these odd touches, like the grasshopper playing violin and taking a bow. The insects are even given dialogue through intertitles. Despite its quirkiness, the 5-minute short was pretty impressive for the time and even earned Starowich a commendation from the Tsar. It's listed on IMDb as The Dragonfly and the Ant, and given a release year of 1913, but most other sources that I found seem to put it at 1911. Year after that, in 1912, Starowich made what is claimed to be the first puppet animated film, The Beautiful Lucanita. Unfortunately, I couldn't find this anywhere, so I'm not sure, it may be lost. That same year, he also released The Cameraman's Revenge, starring animated beetles. It's listed as The Revenge of a Kinematograph Cameraman on IMDb. The short continued the unsettling usage of dead insects for stop-motion animation. They even get to drive a car and visit a nightclub this time. The subject matter is definitely a unique one, as it's about infidelity among insects. Okay, moving on. In 1913, animator John Randolph Bray created his first movie, The Artist's Dream, or as it was also known, The Dachshund and the Sausage. It had some significance because it was the first film to use animation cells, which, if you don't know, are clear pieces of celluloid that are drawn on and then filmed, and they're commonly used in animation ever since. Like many of the other examples in this article, The Artist's Dream also used live-action footage as a frame story and showed an artist drawing the images. The very basic plot of the animated parts consists of a cute little dachshund eyeing a sausage. 1914 saw the return of Winsor McCay with Gertie the Dinosaur, the first film to combine hand-drawn animation with live-action footage. Not only that, it was the first movie, period, to feature a dinosaur. It also had which was at the time a staggering number of 10,000 hand-drawn frames, mostly made by McKay himself and his assistant John A. Fitzsimmons. Some sources claim this to be the first animated work, but that's clearly incorrect. This may be because it was the most successful and well-known one up to that point. Furthermore, on a technical level, it was probably the most refined work of the era. The animation consisted of line drawings, but they were really expressive for the time. My favorite part is when Gertie does a cute little dance for the camera. The live-action parts feature McKay and other animators in what basically amounts to a frame story, which is similar to Little Nemo. Finally, in 1915, there was the first animated film of feature length titled Creation. It was directed by Pinto Colvig, who was famous for designing the Disney logo and being the voice of Goofy. Creation is currently considered a lost film, as only tiny snippets have been found. I could find very little information online about this film, and it actually, as far as I can tell, doesn't even have an IMDb listing. Well, that's all for the animated flicks of this era. Thanks for listening.